My mom forced us to answer the door for everyone, so the same man started coming back every day asking to see my sister. I found the notebook hidden under my sister's mattress on a Thursday afternoon in March, and the first page made my hands go numb. Day 1, he came at 3:45 p.m., asked for me by name, stood too close when I opened the door, smelled like cigarettes and something sweet. Mom made me talk to him for 6 minutes. The entries went on for 31 pages. 31 days of a grown man coming to our door, asking specifically for my 14-year-old sister, while our mother insisted she be polite and answer every single time. The last entry was from yesterday. Day 31. He touched my hair today, said it was pretty, asked if I had a boyfriend. Mom was in the kitchen and didn't see. He knows she won't see. He knows the rules. He's been counting on them. I sat on the floor of Lily's bedroom with that notebook in my lap and realized I'd been watching my sister get groomed by a predator for a month, and I'd done nothing because our mother had trained us so thoroughly to never question her door policy that I'd ignored every screaming instinct telling me something was wrong. The notebook had 20 empty pages left, like Lily was planning for this to continue, like she'd accepted that this man would keep coming back every single day, and there was nothing she could do about it because Mom's rules were absolute. I heard the doorbell ring downstairs. I heard my mother's voice call out in that cheerful sing-song tone she always used. "Lily, someone's here for you." I checked my phone. 3:44 p.m. He was right on time. Our mother's door policy started when I was 8 years old and Lily was 5. We'd been living in our house for about 2 years at that point, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that was safe enough, but not wealthy. Mom worked as a nurse at the county hospital, pulling long shifts that often ran late. Dad had left when Lily was still a baby, just disappeared one day, and never came back. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Mom raised us alone on a nurse's salary, and she did the best she could, but something about Dad leaving broke something inside her that never quite healed right. The door policy came from her childhood. She'd grown up in a strict household where her father had one unbreakable rule: never open the door for anyone, ever. He was paranoid about home invasions and scammers, and basically anyone who might want to interact with his family. If someone knocked, you ignored it completely. If someone rang the doorbell, you pretended you weren't home. If Girl Scouts came selling cookies, you hid in the back room until they left. Mom said she spent her entire childhood feeling isolated and afraid, watching her father turn away neighbors who needed help and delivery drivers who had packages and even police officers who were doing wellness checks. One time when she was 12, her grandmother came to visit unannounced and stood on the porch knocking for 20 minutes, while Mom's father made the whole family sit in silence in the living room. Her grandmother eventually left, hurt and confused, and died 3 months later without ever seeing them again. Mom said that moment destroyed her. She'd wanted to open the door so badly, wanted to hug her grandmother and invite her in, but her father's rule was absolute and questioning it meant punishment. So when Mom had kids of her own, she swung completely the opposite direction. We were going to be the family that welcomed everyone. We were going to be open and friendly, and never make anyone feel rejected or ignored. She made it a house rule from the moment we were old enough to reach the doorknob. If someone knocks or rings the bell, you answer. Every single time. No exceptions. It didn't matter if we were eating dinner or doing homework or in the middle of a shower. If someone came to the door, we stopped what we were doing and we answered it. And we were polite and helpful and kind. Mom said it was about being good neighbors and good people. She said her father's paranoia had poisoned her childhood, and she refused to pass that poison on to us. She said the world was full of good people, and we needed to trust that goodness instead of hiding from it. For years, this policy was just annoying. We'd get solicitors selling pest control services, and we'd have to stand there listening to their pitch, even though we were obviously kids who couldn't make purchasing decisions. We'd get religious groups wanting to discuss salvation, and we'd have to nod politely through their presentations. We'd get neighbors asking to borrow tools or eggs or cups of sugar, and we'd have to help them even if it meant pausing our favorite TV show. Mom would praise us for being so welcoming and courteous. She'd tell us we were making the world a better place just by being kind to whoever showed up at our door. It felt harmless back then, inconvenient sometimes, but not dangerous. We lived in a decent neighborhood where most people who knocked were actually there for legitimate reasons. But then we moved. Mom got a promotion at the hospital that came with a significant raise, but it required relocating to a different city 3 hours away. The new city was bigger, grittier, with higher crime rates and neighborhoods that varied wildly from block to block. We ended up in a house that was technically nicer than our old one, bigger yard and more bedrooms, but the location was questionable. The street had a mix of families and single men who kept to themselves and houses that always seemed to have different cars parked outside at weird hours. Mom insisted it was fine, that we just needed to get to know our neighbors, and they'd be lovely people. The door policy remained exactly the same. Answer for everyone, be polite to everyone, help everyone who asks. Except now, the people knocking weren't Girl Scouts and friendly neighbors. Now we got men asking if our parents were home, people trying to sell us things that seemed stolen, strangers claiming they needed to use our phone for an emergency that sounded rehearsed. I was 16 by this point, old enough to recognize when something felt off. Lily was 13, still trusting and eager to follow Mom's rules, because she'd been raised to believe that answering the door was a moral imperative. I tried to talk to Mom about modifying the policy for our new neighborhood. Maybe we could look through the peephole first and decide whether to answer. Maybe we could tell people to come back when an adult was home. Maybe we could just be a little more cautious given that we didn't know anyone here yet. Mom shut me down immediately. She said I was being paranoid like her father had been, that I was judging people based on appearances and assumptions, that I was letting fear win instead of trust. She said the rule was the rule, and it wasn't changing, and if I tried to ignore someone at the door, there would be consequences. The consequences were severe enough that I stopped trying to fight her on it. Grounding for 2 weeks, no phone, no friends, nothing but school and home. Mom didn't yell or hit, but she knew how to make you feel like you'd committed a moral failure so deep that you'd disappointed not just her, but humanity itself. So Lily and I kept answering the door for everyone who knocked, even when our instincts screamed at us not to. The man started showing up about 4 months after we moved in. It was a Saturday afternoon in late February, and I was in my room doing homework when I heard the doorbell. I heard Lily's footsteps running down the stairs because she was closest, heard the door open, heard her say, "Hi, can I help you?" in that polite voice Mom had trained into us. Then I heard a man's voice, deep and smooth, say, "Well, hello there. You must be Lily. I've seen you around the neighborhood. You're even prettier up close." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I came out of my room and looked down from the top of the stairs. The man was probably in his mid-40s, average height, thinning brown hair, wearing jeans and a faded jacket. He was standing on our porch but leaning into the doorway, closer to Lily than a stranger should be. Lily had the door open wide, the way Mom taught us, welcoming and unafraid. She was smiling politely, even though I could see tension in her shoulders. "Do you need something?" she asked. The man smiled wider. "I'm Paul. I live a few streets over. I was just walking by and thought I'd introduce myself. It's nice to meet the new neighbors, especially such a lovely young lady." He held out his hand for a handshake. Lily hesitated for just a second, then shook it because refusing would have been rude, and rudeness violated Mom's rules. Paul held her hand slightly too long, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that looked deliberate. "It's nice to meet you too," Lily said, pulling her hand back. "I should probably get back to my homework, though." Paul nodded, but didn't step back. Of course. I won't keep you. But hey, I might stop by again sometime. It's good to know your neighbors, right? Maybe we could chat more. You seem like a very mature young lady." The way he emphasized mature made my stomach turn. I started down the stairs, making my footsteps loud so he'd know someone else was home. Paul glanced up at me, and his expression shifted slightly, the warm smile cooling into something more neutral. "Oh, you must be her brother. Hi there. I'm Paul, just introducing myself to the neighborhood." I came to stand next to Lily and put my hand on her shoulder. "Cool. We've got homework to do, so we should probably get back to it." I started to close the door, but Paul put his hand on it, not pushing, just resting there. Sure. But your sister and I were having a nice conversation. No need to be rude, right? Your mom must have taught you better manners than that." He was using Mom's own philosophy against us, calling me rude for trying to end an interaction with a stranger who was clearly making my sister uncomfortable. I looked at Lily, and saw she was frozen, caught between her discomfort and her training to never be impolite. "It's fine," I said firmly. "We really do have homework. Have a good day." I closed the door while Paul was still talking and locked the deadbolt. Lily looked at me with wide eyes. "Michael, you were kind of rude. Mom's going to be upset if he mentions it to her." I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and tell her that stranger was a creep who had no business asking for her by name or commenting on how pretty she was or touching her hand like that. But I also knew if I said any of that, she'd repeat it to Mom, and Mom would accuse me of being paranoid and judgmental. "He'll be fine," I said instead. "Some people talk too much, and you have to cut them off politely. Mom understands that." She didn't seem convinced, but nodded anyway. Paul came back 3 days later. I was at school, but Lily told me about it that evening. He'd rung the doorbell at 3:30 p.m., right when Lily usually got home from school and Mom was still at work. Lily had answered because of course she had, and Paul had acted like they were old friends. He'd asked about her day, about her classes, about whether she liked the new neighborhood. He'd stood on the porch talking to her for 15 minutes, asking increasingly personal questions about her schedule and her interests, and whether she had a lot of friends at her new school. Lily said she'd tried to end the conversation multiple times, but Paul kept asking more questions, and she didn't want to be rude, so she kept answering. Finally, he'd said he should let her go, but he'd love to chat again soon, maybe when she had more time. The way Lily described it made me want to drive around the neighborhood until I found this guy and tell him to stay away from my sister. But I also knew I couldn't do that without Mom getting involved, and Mom would take his side over mine because her door policy was sacred. So instead, I told Lily that if he came back, she should keep the conversation short and tell him she had homework. She agreed, but I could see she felt guilty about even that small boundary, like she was failing Mom's test of being open and welcoming. Paul came back 2 days after that, and 3 days after that, and then twice the following week. Each time he'd ask for Lily specifically. Each time he'd keep her talking longer. Each time he'd get slightly more personal with his questions and comments. By the third week, he was showing up almost every day around 3:45 p.m., right in that window when Lily was home alone before Mom got back from her shift. I started coming home earlier, skipping after-school activities so I'd be there when Paul showed up. The first time I answered the door instead of Lily, Paul's face went flat with disappointment before he rearranged it into a friendly smile. "Oh, hey Michael, I was hoping to catch Lily. Is she around?" I stood in the doorway and kept my body language as closed as possible. "She's busy with homework. Can I help you with something?" Paul's smile tightened. "I just wanted to say hi. We've become friends, your sister and I. She's a very special girl." The word friends in reference to a 40-something man and my 14-year-old sister made me want to punch him. "She's 14, I said flatly, "and she's busy. Maybe don't stop by so often. It's getting kind of weird." Paul's expression went cold for just a second, long enough for me to see what was underneath the friendly neighbor mask. Then he smiled again, wider and faker. "Weird? I'm just being neighborly. You know, the way your mom raised you to be. Open and friendly to everyone. Not paranoid and judgmental like some people." He was throwing Mom's words back at me again. He'd clearly figured out how our household worked and was using it to his advantage. "We appreciate the neighborliness," I said carefully. "But we're good. You don't need to keep checking in every day." Paul studied me for a moment, then shrugged. Sure. But I'll probably still stop by sometimes. Just to say hi to Lily. Like I said, we're friends, and I'd hate for her to think I forgot about her." He walked away before I could respond, and I stood there watching him go down our driveway and onto the sidewalk, heading toward whatever house he actually lived in. I realized I had no idea where he lived. He'd said a few streets over, but that could be anywhere. I didn't even know his last name. That evening I told Mom about Paul, and how often he was coming by, and how his attention seemed focused entirely on Lily in a way that felt wrong. Mom listened while she cooked dinner, nodding occasionally, but not looking particularly concerned. When I finished, she said exactly what I knew she'd say. "Michael, you're being paranoid. Paul sounds like a lonely man who's trying to make friends in the neighborhood. There's nothing wrong with being friendly to your neighbors." I pressed harder. "Mom, he only ever asks for Lily. He's never asked for me. He only wants to talk to a 14-year-old girl. That's not normal. Mom turned from the stove and gave me that look, the one that said I was disappointing her. Michael, not every man who's kind to a young woman is a predator. You're seeing danger where there isn't any because you've been raised in a culture that teaches boys to be suspicious of everyone. That's exactly the kind of thinking I'm trying to prevent in this family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show her statistics about predators who groom children by befriending them and gaining their trust. I wanted to explain that Paul's behavior wasn't friendly, it was targeting. But I knew none of that would matter because Mom's door policy wasn't really about being welcoming. It was about proving she wasn't her father. It was about overcompensating for her childhood trauma by swinging so far in the opposite direction that she'd created a different kind of danger. Can we at least tell Lily she doesn't have to talk to him every time he comes over? I tried. Like, she can be polite but brief? Mom shook her head. Absolutely not. I will not teach my daughter to be cold and dismissive to people who are trying to be nice to her. That's how you create a world where nobody helps each other or cares about each other. Lily is perfectly capable of having a conversation with a neighbor without you hovering over her like some kind of paranoid bodyguard. She called Lily into the kitchen and asked her directly, "Honey, does Paul make you uncomfortable? Does he do or say anything that feels wrong?" Lily glanced at me, then back at Mom. I could see her trying to find the right answer, the one that would make Mom happy. No, he's nice. He just talks a lot. Sometimes I wish he wouldn't come by so much because I have homework, but he's not mean or anything. Mom looked at me triumphantly. See? He's just a friendly neighbor. Lily is fine. You need to stop projecting your anxiety onto her. That was the end of the discussion as far as Mom was concerned. Paul kept coming by. I started documenting it, writing down every time he showed up and how long he stayed and what Lily told me about their conversations. He was escalating. The conversations were getting longer, the questions more personal. He'd started asking about her favorite music and movies, about what she did on weekends, about whether she ever got lonely being new to the neighborhood. He'd started complimenting her more frequently, telling her how mature she seemed for her age, how pretty her smile was, how nice her hair looked. Once, he brought her a flower he claimed he'd picked from his garden. Lily had accepted it because refusing would have been rude. I found the flower later, wilted in her trash can. When I asked why she threw it away, she said it had made her feel weird, but she didn't know how to explain why. That was the moment I realized Lily knew something was wrong, but had been so thoroughly conditioned by Mom's rules that she couldn't articulate or act on her own discomfort. The door policy had trained her to override her instincts and smile through situations that frightened her, because being polite was more important than being safe. I tried one more time to talk to Mom, showing her my documentation of Paul's visits. 23 times in 4 weeks, always asking specifically for Lily, always during the window when she was home alone. Mom looked at my list and said I was being obsessive and controlling, that I needed to let Lily make her own friends and have her own relationships with neighbors. She said she was actually concerned about my behavior more than Paul's, that my need to monitor and control my sister's interactions was unhealthy. She suggested I talk to the school counselor about my anxiety. So I went to the school counselor, but not to talk about my anxiety. I went to talk about a grown man who was targeting my sister. The counselor was a woman named Mrs. Pamela Thornberry, who'd worked at the high school for 8 years. She listened to my whole story with increasing concern, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she asked if I had any evidence beyond my written log of visits. I showed her text messages from Lily where she'd mentioned Paul coming by, screenshots showing dates and times. Mrs. Thornberry said she couldn't intervene directly since Lily was in middle school and not under her jurisdiction, but she could make a referral to Child Protective Services if I thought Lily was in danger. I said I didn't know if she was in danger yet, but something was definitely wrong, and my mom refused to see it. Mrs. Thornberry made copies of my documentation and said she'd make some calls, see if there were any resources or guidance she could offer. 2 days later, a CPS worker named Donald Kramer showed up at our house. Mom was furious. She accused me of going behind her back and trying to undermine her parenting. She told Mr. Kramer, who had 11 years of experience in child welfare investigations, that there was no problem, that Paul was a harmless neighbor, that her paranoid son was inventing danger because he couldn't handle the family's move to a new city. Mr. Kramer asked to speak with Lily privately. Mom allowed it because refusing would have made her look guilty. Lily told Mr. Kramer the same thing she'd told Mom. Paul was nice. He talked a lot. Sometimes it was annoying, but he'd never touched her inappropriately or said anything explicitly threatening. Mr. Kramer asked if Paul had ever asked her to keep secrets or meet him somewhere private. Lily said no. He asked if Paul had ever tried to contact her outside of the doorbell visits, like through social media or phone. Lily said no. Without any concrete evidence of grooming or abuse, there was nothing CPS could do. Mr. Kramer gave Mom a pamphlet about recognizing warning signs of predatory behavior and suggested the family might benefit from counseling to improve communication. Then he left, and Mom grounded me for a month for making false reports and wasting government resources. During that month, Paul's visits continued. Lily stopped telling me about them because she knew it would upset me and I couldn't do anything about it anyway. I'd catch glimpses through my bedroom window sometimes, see Paul on the porch talking to my sister, see how he'd lean in close, see how Lily would take small steps backward, trying to create distance without being obvious about it. I felt completely powerless. Every authority figure I'd approached had either dismissed me or said they couldn't help without evidence of actual abuse. My own mother was enabling this situation by forcing Lily to engage with a man who was clearly grooming her. And Lily herself couldn't or wouldn't advocate for her own safety because she'd been trained since childhood that being polite to everyone who knocked on our door was a moral obligation. That's when I found the notebook. I'd gone into Lily's room to borrow a phone charger and noticed her mattress was slightly askew, like she'd been hiding something under it. I lifted the corner and found a spiral notebook with private written on the cover in her handwriting. I knew I shouldn't read it. I knew it was an invasion of privacy. But something told me I needed to see what was inside. The first entry was dated 4 months ago, right around when Paul had first shown up. Lily had been documenting every single visit, every comment he made, every time he touched her arm or her shoulder or her hair. She'd been keeping a record of her own grooming, writing down all the things that made her uncomfortable, but that she couldn't tell Mom about, because Mom would say she was being paranoid, like her Uncle Michael. The entries got progressively worse. Paul had started asking if she had a boyfriend, if she'd ever been kissed, if she thought older men were attractive. He'd started telling her she was too mature and beautiful to waste time with boys her own age. He'd started suggesting they should spend time together outside of these doorbell visits, maybe go for a walk in the park or grab coffee sometime. Lily had deflected these suggestions, but Paul kept making them, kept pushing the boundaries little by little, testing what he could get away with. The most recent entries were the worst. Paul had told Lily that he thought about her all the time, that she was special, that he'd never met anyone like her. He'd asked if she ever thought about him. He'd said he could tell she felt the same connection he did, that it was obvious they understood each other in a way other people wouldn't understand. Classic grooming language, building a special relationship, creating a sense of uniqueness and secrecy, isolating her emotionally from her family and peers. And the last entry, from yesterday, included the detail about him touching her hair. He was moving from verbal to physical contact. He was escalating. I heard the doorbell ring downstairs. I heard Mom's cheerful voice calling for Lily. I checked the time, 3:44 p.m. Paul was here, right on schedule. And my sister was about to go downstairs and spend another 15 minutes being groomed by a predator while our mother smiled and praised her for being so polite to the neighbors. I grabbed the notebook and ran downstairs. Mom was in the kitchen, and Lily was walking toward the front door. I could see Paul's silhouette through the frosted glass. "Lily, don't," I said. She turned and looked at me, confused. "Michael, what's wrong?" I held up the notebook. "I found this. I read it. I know what he's been doing." Lily's face went pale. "You went through my stuff? Michael, that's private." Mom came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" "Lily, there's someone at the door. Go answer it." I stepped between Lily and the door. "No, she's not answering. Not this time." Mom's expression hardened. "Michael, move. Now. You know the rules." I opened the notebook and started reading the entries out loud. Lily tried to grab it from me, but I held it away from her, kept reading, kept forcing Mom to hear what had been happening in her own house, while she insisted everything was fine. Day 15. He asked if I'd ever been kissed. Said he could show me how if I wanted. Said older men knew how to treat a lady right. Day 22. He said he thinks about me when he's alone at home. Said I'm special. Said we have a connection. Mom's face was changing as I read, the defensive anger shifting into something that looked like dawning horror. Lily was crying now, begging me to stop, saying I was ruining everything. The doorbell rang again. Paul had been waiting on the porch this whole time, probably wondering why nobody was answering. Day 31, I read, my voice shaking. He touched my hair today, said it was pretty, asked if I had a boyfriend. Mom was in the kitchen and didn't see. He knows she won't see. He knows the rules. He's been counting on them. I looked up at Mom. He's been grooming her for a month. 31 days of coming to our house and manipulating your daughter while you forced her to smile and be polite because you're so obsessed with not being your father that you can't see you've created a different kind of prison. Mom's face crumpled. She grabbed the notebook from my hands and read it herself, flipping through pages, her hands shaking. The doorbell rang a third time, more insistent now. I'll handle this, Mom said quietly. She walked to the front door and opened it. Paul was standing on the porch with that same friendly smile, but it faltered when he saw Mom's expression. Hi there, he said. I was hoping to catch Lily. Is she available? Mom stepped out onto the porch, forcing Paul to back up. I couldn't hear everything she said, but I heard enough. Heard her tell Paul that he was never to come to this house again, never to speak to Lily again, never to so much as look at her daughter. Heard Paul try to play innocent, say he was just being friendly, act confused about why she was upset. Heard Mom say that if he ever came within 100 feet of Lily, she'd call the police and show them the detailed documentation of his predatory behavior. Paul's mask finally dropped. His voice got hard and mean. You're crazy. I was just trying to be nice to your kid because she's obviously lonely and neglected. You're making something sick out of basic human kindness. You're the problem here, not me. Mom came back inside and slammed the door. She locked the deadbolt, the chain, everything. Then she turned to Lily and pulled her into a hug. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. You tried to tell me something was wrong and I didn't listen. I was so focused on not being my father that I couldn't see I was hurting you in a different way. Lily sobbed into Mom's shoulder. All the tension she'd been holding for a month came pouring out. Mom held her and cried with her, and I stood there watching my family break apart and start to heal at the same time. But Paul didn't stop. He came back the next day at the same time. We didn't answer, but he stood on the porch for 10 minutes ringing the doorbell over and over. He came back the day after that, and the day after that. On the fourth day, he started yelling through the door, saying Lily had led him on, saying she'd wanted his attention, and now she was playing games. Mom called the police. Officer Raymond Delgado, 15 years on the force, showed up and took a report. He asked if Paul had made any explicit threats. Mom said no. He was just harassing us. Officer Delgado said without explicit threats or evidence of a crime, there wasn't much he could do except go talk to Paul and tell him to stop coming by. He said we could document the harassment and potentially file for a restraining order if it continued. Officer Delgado came back an hour later and said he'd spoken with Paul, who claimed he was just trying to be a good neighbor and we were overreacting. Paul had promised to leave us alone, and Officer Delgado said that should be the end of it. It wasn't the end of it. Paul stopped coming to our front door, but he started showing up other places. He'd be outside Lily's school when she got out, standing across the street, watching. He'd be at the grocery store when we went shopping, walking past our cart and smiling at Lily. He'd be in his car parked on our street, just sitting there, making sure we knew he was watching. Mom documented everything. Photos of his car parked outside, screenshots of times and dates, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen him lurking. She filed for a restraining order, and we had a hearing in family court. Paul showed up with a lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit who made us sound like paranoid lunatics inventing a threat that didn't exist. Paul testified that he'd been friendly to new neighbors, and we'd taken it the wrong way, that he'd stopped coming by as soon as we asked, that his presence in public places was coincidental, and we were stalking him more than he was stalking us. The judge, Honorable Patricia Vance with 22 years on the bench, read through Lily's notebook entries and the documentation of Paul's visits. She granted a temporary restraining order requiring Paul to stay at least 300 feet away from Lily, our home, and her school. Paul's lawyer argued it was excessive. Judge Vance said she'd rather be excessive than risk a child's safety. The restraining order should have solved the problem. It didn't. Paul started creating fake social media accounts to try to message Lily. He'd use different names and photos, but the messages were always the same. I miss our talks. You know we're meant to be friends. Your mom doesn't understand us. We should meet up somewhere private where we can talk without her interference. Lily showed us every message and we reported every account, but he'd just create a new one. Mom had Lily's school implement a safety plan. Lily was never to be alone, always walked out with a teacher or staff member, never allowed to leave campus without a parent present. We changed our routines, varied our routes, started looking over our shoulders everywhere we went. Living with a stalker who'd been welcomed into our home became our new normal. Then, Lily's best friend Zoe told her something that made everything click into place. Zoe had been doing a genealogy project for school and had access to public records databases. She'd looked up Paul's name out of curiosity and found he was a registered sex offender. He'd been convicted 8 years ago for sexual exploitation of a minor in another state. He'd served 4 years in prison and was required to register his address and stay away from places where children congregated. Our house, where a 14-year-old girl was required by her mother's policy to answer the door for everyone, had been the perfect hunting ground for him. He'd known exactly what he was doing when he started showing up every day, asking for Lily by name. He'd studied our family, figured out our vulnerabilities, and exploited them methodically. Mom went to the police with this information. The officer who took the report, Detective Lisa Gorman with 12 years in sex crimes investigations, pulled Paul's full record. The conviction 8 years ago had involved him befriending a 13-year-old girl through her family, gaining their trust as a nice neighbor, grooming her over several months, and eventually sexually assaulting her. The pattern was identical to what he'd been doing with Lily. Detective Gorman said that as a registered sex offender, Paul was required to notify law enforcement before establishing any relationship with a minor. He hadn't done that. His repeated visits to our home to see a 14-year-old girl violated the terms of his registration. The fake social media accounts violated the restraining order and potentially constituted cyberstalking. She said they had enough to arrest him and charge him with multiple violations. They arrested Paul at his apartment 2 days later. Detective Gorman called to let us know they'd taken him into custody and he was being held on $50,000 bail. She said given his history and the violation of his sex offender registration, the DA was pursuing serious charges that could send him back to prison for years. She thanked us for documenting everything so thoroughly. She said Lily's notebook and Mom's logs of Paul's visits had provided crucial evidence. The trial happened 6 months later. Lily had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom and describe how Paul had groomed her, how he'd used her mother's door policy to gain access to her, how he'd progressively tested boundaries and escalated his behavior. The defense attorney tried to make it seem like Lily was a dramatic teenager inventing danger for attention, but the notebook entries, written in real time over 31 days, were impossible to dismiss. The pattern was clear. The escalation was documented. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Kevin Wu, with 9 years prosecuting sex crimes, presented expert testimony about grooming behaviors and how Paul's actions matched the textbook pattern. He showed Paul's prior conviction and argued this was a habitual predator who'd targeted another young girl using the exact same methods. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before convicting Paul on all charges: violation of sex offender registration, violation of restraining order, attempted child enticement, and cyberstalking. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. In her sentencing remarks, she said that Paul had shown no remorse, no understanding of the harm he'd caused, no indication he wouldn't do this again if given the opportunity. She said he was precisely the kind of predator the sex offender registry was designed to track and the kind of person restraining orders were meant to protect children from. She said Lily was extraordinarily brave for documenting her own grooming and for testifying against him. She said she hoped this sentence would give Lily and her family the peace and safety they deserved. Mom changed after that. She didn't abandon her values about being open and welcoming, but she recognized that openness without boundaries was just vulnerability. She modified the door policy. We no longer answered for everyone automatically. We looked through the peephole, we asked who it was, we verified identity before opening. If someone made us uncomfortable, we were allowed to not answer at all. Politeness was no longer more important than safety. Mom also started therapy to work through her childhood trauma and understand how her overcompensation had put her own children at risk. She said the hardest part was accepting that in trying not to be her father, she'd created a different kind of danger, one that had almost cost her daughter everything. Lily was in therapy too, working through the grooming and the stalking and the violation of having a predator target her in her own home. Her therapist, Dr. Angela Brennan, who specialized in adolescent trauma, said Lily's instinct to document what was happening even when she couldn't stop it showed remarkable self-advocacy. She said the notebook had probably saved Lily's life because it created a record that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Lily said she'd started the notebook because she knew something was wrong, but she also knew Mom would never believe her without proof, so she decided to build the proof herself. She'd been protecting herself the only way she knew how. I think about that a lot. How a 14-year-old girl understood she was being groomed, but felt so powerless within her own family's rules that all she could do was document it and hope someone would eventually listen. How our mother's trauma had created a policy that predators could exploit. How being nice and welcoming had nearly destroyed my sister's life. The door policy came from a good place. Mom genuinely believed she was protecting us from the isolation and fear that had defined her childhood. But trauma-based parenting always has blind spots. And ours was massive enough for a predator to walk right through. Paul is in prison now. He'll be eligible for parole in 8 years, but with his record and the nature of his crimes, the likelihood is low. Even if he gets out, he'll be monitored for life, restricted from contact with minors, flagged in every database that tracks sex offenders. He'll never be able to do to another child what he tried to do to Lily. We still live in the same house, but it feels different now. The door has a peephole and a deadbolt and a chain lock. We have a Ring doorbell camera that records everyone who comes to the porch. We have a family rule that you never have to talk to someone who makes you uncomfortable no matter how polite they seem, no matter what authority they claim to have. Lily is 16 now, 2 years past the nightmare with Paul. She's doing okay, or as okay as someone can be after experiencing what she went through. She has bad days where she doesn't want to answer the door for anyone, even friends she knows and trusts. She has moments where she sees a car that looks like Paul's and her whole body goes rigid. But she also has good days where she laughs with her friends and forgets to be afraid, where she's just a teenager living her life without looking over her shoulder. Mom and I have a better relationship now. She apologized for not listening when I tried to tell her something was wrong, for dismissing my concerns as paranoia, for prioritizing her own trauma over her children's safety. She said she'd spent so many years defining herself in opposition to her father that she couldn't see she'd swung too far in the other direction. I told her I understood why she'd created the door policy, that I didn't blame her for trying to protect us from the fear she'd grown up with. But I also told her that protection comes in many forms, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and teach your kids that their discomfort matters more than a stranger's feelings. The notebook is still in Lily's room. She keeps it in her desk drawer now, not hidden anymore. She said it reminds her that she survived, that she was smart enough to create evidence even when she felt powerless, that she saved herself even when the adults around her weren't listening. Sometimes I think about how close we came to a different ending. If I hadn't found that notebook when I did, if I hadn't forced Mom to read it, if we'd kept following the door policy blindly, what would have happened? How far would Paul have escalated? The grooming was already progressing toward physical contact, toward suggestions of meeting privately. It doesn't take much imagination to see where that path led. But we stopped it. We stopped it because Lily was brave enough to document what was happening, because I was paranoid enough to keep pushing even when everyone told me I was overreacting, because Mom was capable of hearing the truth once it was impossible to deny. We stopped it, and Paul is in prison, and my sister is safe. That's the only ending that matters. The world is full of people like Paul, predators who study vulnerabilities and exploit them with patience and precision. They look for families with weak boundaries, children who've been trained to prioritize politeness over safety, parents who are too trusting or too traumatized to see danger, even when it's ringing their doorbell every day at 3:45 p.m. The best defense against people like that isn't paranoia or isolation. It's not locking every door and trusting no one and teaching your kids that everyone is dangerous. But it's also not the opposite extreme. It's not forcing your kids to welcome everyone who shows up and smile through their own discomfort because being nice is more important than being safe. The answer is somewhere in the middle. It's teaching kids that their instincts matter, that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, that they're allowed to say no and close doors and protect themselves even if it seems rude. It's teaching them that real kindness doesn't require them to sacrifice their safety, that boundaries are healthy, that people who push against those boundaries are showing you exactly who they are. Mom understands that now. She teaches it to the other parents in our neighborhood, warns them about predators who test boundaries and target vulnerable families. She tells Lily's story, with Lily's permission, to help other people recognize grooming behaviors before they escalate. She says if sharing our nightmare can prevent even one other family from going through what we did, it's worth the discomfort of talking about it. Lily graduates high school next year. She wants to study criminal justice and work with organizations that help victims of sexual exploitation. She says she wants to be the person who listens when a kid says something feels wrong, the person who believes them the first time instead of the 30th. She says she wants to help other families understand that predators don't look like monsters. They look like friendly neighbors who bring flowers and ask about your day and slowly, methodically destroy your sense of safety, while everyone around you insists you're overreacting. I'm proud of her. Proud of how she survived, how she's healing, how she's turning her trauma into purpose. Paul tried to break her, and instead she documented his crimes, helped put him in prison, and became someone who fights for other victims. He failed completely, and we won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but we won. Mom's door policy is dead. Long live the new policy. Answer the door when you want to, for people you trust, on your own terms. Be kind when kindness is safe. Be cautious when caution is warranted. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself and the people you love. And if someone keeps coming back, keeps pushing, keeps asking for your 14-year-old sister every single day at the same time, don't wait for permission to recognize danger. Act, document, speak up. Keep speaking up until someone listens. We learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it. And my sister is safe. And the predator who targeted her is in prison where he belongs. That's justice. Imperfect, hard-won, arrived at too late, but not too late. We got there. We survived, and we made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.